From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there and welcome to Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis here on CAN TV. We're going to tackle several thorny issues on the show today. A little bit later on, we're going to talk once again about the politics behind the Obama Presidential Center and whether there's any validity to the OPC's claim that if you start making agreements with one community organization, then before you know it, there'll be hundreds of organizations standing at the door with their hands out. But we're beginning today with the big news that CPS graduation rates are rising very quickly, up 14 points over the past few years, actually. And schools boss Janice Jackson says a major factor in that big change is the almost staggering rise in the graduation rate for black males, 18 points since 2014. So how did CPS do this? Well, you know, there's so many issues involving the manual administration, the devil's in the details. And that's why Chicago has Sarah Karp. She's an education reporter at WBEZ. She's broken some of the biggest stories about the public school system in the last decade. And she's here today to help us get a handle on this rather complicated claim. And as always, Sarah Karp, it's great to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We have a lot to sort of try to unpack here today, but I'd like to start with the fact that I know you were at the school board meeting yesterday, and just a few days ago, Janice Jackson rather boldly stood up and pronounced her 5-year plan for the Chicago Public Schools. How did you read that?
Well, to be fair to her, they started developing this 5-year plan prior to Mayor Rahm Emanuel announcing that he was not going to run for re-election. Mm-hmm. So they paid consultants, they did this big survey, they did a whole bunch of different elements to develop this plan. And I think that she might have thought, well, if I'm going to announce it, I better do it now.
Yeah. Might not be able to do it
right.
6 months from now, yeah.
But at the same time, you know, the elements of it are not like any huge surprise or really all that controversial. I mean, like being more equitable, having integrity, you know, little things like that.
Be best.
Yeah, be great. You know, some of these things, but keep kids safe. I mean, you know, they're not, you know, really out of the box visions for the future. But she also really wants to keep her job. So maybe this was sort of a way to say to the mayoral candidates, whoever gets elected, hey, here's what I want to do, and here's my plan for the future, and I hope you're listening, and I hope you think it's a good one.
Yeah. It's been fascinating to watch the mayoral candidates both kind of dance around her. I mean, they seem to be kind of non-committal, but at the same time, I think they're also recognizing that she has a constituency now. I mean, she's been around for a while, and a lot of people have been saying that she's been doing, obviously there's lots of things that she's being criticized for, but she's also being lauded for doing some things right. Right,
and she's an insider, she's homegrown, you know, she's been around for a while. Yesterday at the Board of Education meeting, about 12 to 15 principals came and just to say how much they loved her and they supported her. She's had some community action councils, which are like community groups, come and say, hey, you know, keep Janice Jackson. So she has that support. Now, there are some people who will see that she's tied to Emanuel and some of the things that they dislike about the way Emanuel ran the school system, they'll dislike about Janice.
I'll give you a prediction. She'll be untied from Emanuel about 11 seconds after the inauguration.
Oh yeah, she's already in little ways trying to distance herself. I mean, even there was an announcement, I think it was Friday of last week, about preschool expansion, and you know, usually she'd speak and she'd give a long, you know, have a big part of that press conference, and I think at that press conference it was very minimal. So I don't know if she was, you know, if that was planned or if that was any way of her saying, I want to separate myself, but I think, you know, she's starting to say like, okay, I better hook my ship to somebody else's boat.
I mean, it just, I don't know, this is probably naive, but it just seems to me that when Mayor Preckwinkle or Mayor Lightfoot has their first meeting with her, they're going to quickly come to the realization that they don't have any better ideas, you know? So it's like maybe we better hang with her and try to work with her and see if we can change course a little bit, but we've really got a soldier here who can deliver for us if we give her the right instructions. I don't know. That's just my guess.
And then also the question is who would you choose otherwise?
Right,
So
right.
you know, Mayor Emanuel chose for his first two people, you know, outsiders from different states and cities, and they didn't work out. And
I think we can
you know,
say that.
and then you know, then he chose sort of, you know, a bureaucrat who wasn't steeped in education.
Right.
And so I feel like, well, is there somebody within CPS that that's like a shining star that's more aligned?
yeah,
I'm sort of, I don't know where they would go.
It's really interesting because there are, and you know, I worked for a long time for the city and all that, and I came to the conclusion a long time ago that there are basically three piles. There's the completely foreign outsider that you bring in to just wipe everything out and clean it up. There's the professional bureaucrat, the Forrest Claypool type, the kinds who've been inside for a long time, and they can be pretty much moved around. They can do any old thing, and you know, whether it's CTA or the schools or whatever. And then there's the deep insider, like Streets and Sand. In order to run Streets and Sand, you have to have been a deputy or something for years and years and years, because you got to know where all the trucks are, right? And Rahm Emanuel tried all three.
Right, that's right, exactly right.
and I think he found he was happiest with the deep insider who was pretty clever at, you know, who knew everything that needed to be known about all the deep dark secrets. I don't know.
Right. I mean, you know, the biggest question will be that the next mayor does not, whether it's Lori Lightfoot or Tony Preckwinkle, they're not big on charter schools.
Right.
They want to move to an elected school.
Yeah.
And this is the other, you know, sort of red herring out there, is that if Chicago moves to elected school board, when that will be 2020, will be 2023. There's bills in the Illinois General Assembly that put it at both timelines. But let's say it's 2020. Then the next Board of Education is the one that will actually pick the next CEO.
Yeah.
And so, you know, really forget the mayor candidate. Now we're talking with trying to please, you know, however many people are on that board, and trying to get some consensus among that group, and that might be actually much more difficult.
You
for
see
Janice.
that in Springfield yesterday, the bill passed 13-0 in committee, I guess. So it's moving forward. So we're going to have, it's quite likely we really are going to have an elected school board of some kind. Devil's in the details, as we said. But one of those proposals that got shot down was for a 50 member school board, one from every ward. And I'm just thinking, dear God, give me Mayor Daley back. Let's have 5 of his friends on the school board. I'm getting really cold feet about this whole elected school board thing, but you know.
Well, let me just say, as an education reporter, I'm excited.
It'll give you stories
forever. A lot of
forever.
stuff to write about, and actually it'll be interesting because, you know, it's bringing democracy to a process that has been really sort of closed from democracy. And,
absolutely true.
You know, it is something when you go to Board of Education meetings. You do sort of feel like I'm just watching some theater here, because they all know how they're going to vote. There's no real discussion.
They've had their meeting. They were told what to do.
They've had their meetings, right? And they've asked. They'll even say, "I've already asked all my questions like previously," and so you're just sort of like, "What am I here for?" So I am looking forward to some debate and discussion.
I'm being glib about this. I think that it's absolutely essential to have some kind of democratic process involved here where the people's voices are heard. The question, as I said, is always just how do you go about it? And well, we're going to find out.
Yeah,
we're sure going to find out.
It's going to be very interesting.
So, dissecting the soaring graduation rate for black males in Chicago public schools. Just a beautiful piece that you wrote. It's on the BEZ website, and I really recommend reading it. That's why I read the headline to it, Dissecting the Soaring Graduation Rate. I like the way, by the way, that you're doing separate audio stuff on the air now, and you're also doing written pieces on the website and online that are
lots of great
with
stuff
much
on
more detail.
WBEZ.org.
Yeah, there
so
really
a lot of
is.
really good content there.
And I will say that with enthusiastic support. You're doing some really great work. Okay, where to begin with this? In 5 years, the black graduation rate is up by 18 points and up by 14 points for everybody else. In 5 years, that would take us back to 2014. In 2015, you wrote, and we had you here, you sat at this table and talked about the story you wrote in 2015 about how they were getting the graduation rates up with some pretty hinky kind of manipulations of numbers and some weird schools. Is that still the case today?
Well, partly this story had a little bit to do with that. So in 2015, Chicago Public Schools greatly expanded the number of alternative schools that the school district had. And they brought in for-profit, out-of-town providers. Most of them offered half-day programs or like a couple hours a day, and most of them were online. Mm-hmm. There's some exceptions, but that was the primary way. Mm-hmm. And this was way different from in the past. In the past, what we had was most of our alternative schools were run by community-based organizations. They much looked like a regular school. They were like 8 to 3, but they were just much smaller and intimate and like in the basement of a community organization or something like that.
But they were certified, qualified Chicago Public Schools, right? They were
run under an umbrella of a charter school, but they were basically Chicago Public Schools. And a lot of them had been around before they became charter schools and were sort of independent, but then some of the funding changed and they became charter schools. Okay. So that was how we did it for a long time. There was an idea that we needed more alternative schools. There was a report that was done in like 2008, 2009 that said that there were 50,000 dropouts on the streets of Chicago. And so there was an idea like, can we get those kids diplomas? What can we do? But for some reason that was never exactly explained to me, Barbara Bird Bennett, who was CEO at the time, decided to go forward with these for-profit alternative schools. And they offer sort of a quick diploma, though it's because they offer an accelerated program. So you should be able to get a diploma there from start to finish in 2.5 years. But that also means that you can get credits, you can rack up credits quicker. And there's just some question about whether alternative schools offer the same quality of an education or same quality of diploma as traditional schools.
Well, I mean, that would seem pretty fundamental, wouldn't it? If you can do it in 2.5 issues instead of 4 years, then there's a difference. There a compromise somewhere?
Right. And also, I mean, some of these are sort of, my colleague Becky Vivi and I, who did the original stories, we watched like a girl was on an online program and she sort of like, toggled between Google to get the answers and the program. So there's a lot of questions about these programs.
That's good training for life because that's the way we all lead our lives
that's
too.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
She was clever, so give her some points for that. But anyways, fast forward a couple years, and I'm hearing Janice Jackson every time that she talks about the increasing graduation rate of Chicago Public Schools. She always takes time to say, it's near and dear to my heart, the fact that we are increasing the graduation rate for black male students. They've always historically have had the lowest graduation rates, and if we can lift their boats, then we're really doing something. But I just couldn't stop thinking about like what is behind that. Are we really doing such a great job? So I just sort of over the last
just a bookmark here for a moment. In your 2015 story, you told these what I would consider to be harrowing stories of these kind of like strip mall storefronts with kids sitting with laptops for a couple of hours a day, and then they get a diploma made.
Right. So this was so knowing that had happened. And then hearing about the graduation rate, I was curious, about what was really behind it, what was really going on. And, in my heart, I was like, wouldn't it be great if I looked at the numbers and I was like, wow, actually, starting freshman students, a lot of them are making more and more making them to graduation. And that is part of the story. It's just not as big of a part of the story as you would have somebody think like, oh, we should be celebrating this as a big improvement. So what it turns out is that some of the reason why the graduation rate for Black students is improving is because there's just fewer in the school district. I mean, there's been a huge out-migration. There's like a lot fewer kids in the school district to even be counting. And
so the percentage goes up when
so
your base number is smaller.
Right. So it's like a math question. You know, we're looking at a different denominator and numerator, and so you know, and so if you look at the actual raw numbers, there's actually way fewer Black male students getting diplomas from Chicago Public Schools today than 5 years ago.
Wow.
That's unquestionable. And one really interesting thing about that is that when you talk about who's leaving CPS, the University of Chicago found that lower performing students are leaving than the ones that are staying. So the question is are people leaving, are kids just leaving, and it's sort of like a pit stop to dropping out? And if so, I mean, I'm not saying that's all on the backs of Chicago Public Schools, but it doesn't really solve the problem that we might have if somebody moves to Thornton, to Harvey, right? Or somebody moves to the Maywood and winds up dropping off there. They might wind up back in Chicago and being a dropout on the street of Chicago anyways. So, you know, are we really solving a bigger problem? So that's one part of the story. The other part of the story is that the number of diplomas from these alternative schools has skyrocketed, especially for Black students.
In the last 5 years?
In the last 5 years. I mean, so in 2013, about 2% of all students got their diplomas from alternative schools, and that was around the same for Black students. Now, about 9% of the kids who start freshman year who are Black.
Of all kids,
no,
of Black kids?
Of Black kids get their diplomas from alternative schools. That's about 15% of the diplomas that are given to Black students come from alternative schools today.
Wow.
For all other racial ethnic groups, it's gone up a little bit, but just a little bit, like to about between 3 and 5%. So, you know, so there's a question, and to quote G2 Brown, who actually you know, from Coco from Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, you know, he says, like, well, are we giving these kids, like, is it okay with us to give these kids sort of a lesser diploma, and are we just sort of pushing kids to alternative schools and then you know, just saying, okay, success, we gave them a diploma? I mean, I think there's a lot of questions.
Can I
there.
quote you back to yourself? I always love doing that. It's one of my
Yes.
favorite parts of the show. You write of one of these schools. Actually, I'm not sure. We have to figure out which school it was. But the class started with 145 freshmen.
Yeah.
Which school?
So
are we
this
talking
is
about?
now we're talking about Phillips High School.
Phillips, okay.
Historical high school,
Yes,
one of our old neighborhood schools. You know, in the South Side.
Let me read you what you wrote about Phillips. The class started with, now there's numbers here, okay? So, you know, it's hard to do numbers on TV, and we can't afford to do all these.
It's hard on the radio
right.
also.
We can't afford to do all these, you know, special graphics and stuff. So just follow along, okay? The class started with 145 freshmen, remember that. But more than half never made it to graduation. In the final graduation tally, 33 students were not counted because they died or were transferred to a suburban or private school. On top of that, 41 students officially dropped out. Okay, we're following this, so 33 and 41 deducted. That left 71. And of the 71 graduates, half of the 71 graduates got their diplomas from schools other than Phillips, where they started, the vast majority from alternative schools, according to CBS data. In June 2017, just 37 of those original 145 students walked across the creaky stage of the ornate auditorium, shook the principal's hand, and got that diploma, 37 of 145. But here's the thing, despite that, the school's official graduation rate says 65%.
Yeah, that's, I mean, and
it's a beautiful piece of writing.
Phillips is just an example, right? But this is true of a good number of high schools in Chicago. The kids, the way that you and I might think of high school, I mean, I started freshman year, I graduated from the same high school, I went to a Chicago public school.
Yeah, me too.
And I could probably count in my head the number of kids that transferred out, and I could probably count in my head the number of kids that transferred in.
Yeah.
And most of the kids that left actually dropped out.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I I went to school in the heyday of dropping out. Well, maybe, but I mean, at that time, I think the dropout rate was like 50%. So a lot of kids did drop out. But it's just not the reality anymore.
Yeah.
When we look at a graduation rate, what we might be looking at kids who've gone 2-3 schools, tried out a couple different scenarios, and maybe eventually made it. But it's not like they've had this sort of old time high school experience where they started, they went all the way to that. Now some do, but it's just not the common experience anymore.
And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about those, that percentage of the percentage that got their diplomas from one of these alternate schools. Now, last time I talked to you, I believe it was last time, we were also kicking around the idea that when you go to one of these alternative schools and you get your diploma, you can have that diploma be from the high school that you, I don't want to say dropped out of, but let's just say gave up on, right?
Right, and that's only for the for-profit ones.
Only for the for-profit ones?
Not for the ones that run for not-for-profit ones. And here's why. It's kind of an interesting little trick or thing. So the state of Illinois says that schools can't be run by for-profit companies, okay? So to get around that in 2015, what the school district did was they made them like sort of programs underneath in a department. So they have a department,
like hiring a consultant.
Basically, right. It's just a contract. It's not, it's actually, that's what they call them in technical terms, like a contracted school. But because you can't have them technically run a school, they're really just programs on paper. Though, I mean, when you walk in the door, it says, Bridgescape, or it says Camelot, or it says whatever. But because they can't give you a diploma from a program, so let's say you dropped out of Wells, you will get a diploma that will say you graduated from Wells, even if you finished your diploma at Bridgescape.
And even if you
Pathways.
only actually put in a couple of years and half days. And you also make this other point too, that the schools don't provide all of the state mandated number of hours of instruction, but they make that up by having the kids say, oh, I'll just do extra homework.
That's right. So
and
they're,
of course
they're not
do.
they're not in seats 6.5 hours. That's one thing.
Yeah.
And they also, and this is true of all alternative schools, the minimum requirements for credits for the state of Illinois is 19, and that's how much you have to get to graduate from the alternative schools. In Chicago, you have to get 21 credits. So it's slightly less credits, but that's like half a semester that you don't have to do.
Right.
So so it's things have really changed.
So I'm wondering about this as I'm reading this. If we could create a universe of the black male students who start and go 4 years and finish, if we could just look at that universe, is that increasing? Are there black kids, black male kids, who are starting out at CPS and finishing, and they might not have finished 5 years ago under the same circumstances?
So according to the data, it shows that in 2013, which would be like the kids that started in like 2007, 2008, about 42% made it through. In 2017, which is the most recent class of that we have, 48%. So it is an increase.
48%.
Yeah, it's 6% more, and so that is something to say.
That's not a small accomplishment.
But I just think the point to make is that still half of the kids, the black male students who start, don't get a diploma from a traditional high school in Chicago. And maybe that speaks to looking a little bit at the what we're offering kids, are we keeping kids? And of course if you talk to CPS, and this is definitely true, there's a lot of stuff going on that's preventing kids from graduating that has nothing to do with school. I mean, you are taken out of the denominator if you are killed. And one thing is that 48 kids from freshman to senior year were killed in the part of the last graduation. 48 black males. That's 4 times the number.
Are you saying that's in 1 year?
No, that's over the 4-year period. So of the freshmen that started over those 4 years. So, but that's 4 times the next group, which is Latino males. So Latino males are 12, Black males 48. I mean, that's a, you know, that's a horrifying figure. And when you think about it, you know, that's, I think what I'm trying to say is I felt like with this story, it's not trying to say, ha, I got you. It's more so saying, like, let's not celebrate something until we, like, really uncover what really is going on.
Boy, I tell you, that was exactly the reaction I had reading your stories. Is like, you know what? Let's not do this big, you know, let's not put on the big Broadway show here. There's improvement. You're making improvement, and nobody denies that you're making improvement in the worst of all possible conditions where, you know, 40 of your kids are killed while you're doing this.
And actually, one of the things that another reporter who works for the old Catalyst, which is now the Chicago Report, Kaylin Belshaw, did a story about how the place where the kids that get killed, they're primarily, there's a lot of them from alternative schools. They wind up in alternative schools and they get killed. And, you know, I think that there's a real look that these are really the kids that we need to maybe be honing in on. And what the school district does is we fund these schools like we fund charter schools. We give them like a per pupil. And when these for-profit people, I mean, vendors, they take a profit. I mean, actually, because they're for-profit, so they're looking for their profit. And the question is, like, these are the kids who need the most. And it seems as though they're actually getting the least. And I think that that's probably the biggest problem. Like, you don't need to be in school. If you're, like, already dropped out and you're having some issues, do you really need to be in school 3 hours a day and sit in front of a computer? Maybe you need that interaction with people. Maybe you need that teacher who puts, you know, who says to you, I care. How can I help you?
Maybe you need that after school activity.
Maybe you need that after school activity, but instead we're sending them to these anemic schools that are just, you know, drained of everything, and then, like, you know, saying, well, is that good enough? And it's
not. I'll say it. You don't have to say that. I'll say it. It's not. So that is, you know, are you watching Mayor Lightfoot? You got some work to do. Mayor Preckwinkle, whichever. It's going to be very interesting to watch. Sarah, it's been great having you on the show many times, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And you know, it's got to be said, you've written some of the best education stuff that's been written in the last 10 years. Hey, you're the one who nailed Barbara Bird Bed, and let's not forget that. So yeah. I don't know if that's
I don't
know. But it's true.
Crazy times.
You wrote some of the best stuff on that, and I celebrate you for what you're doing. Keep it up, okay?
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, Sarah. Sarah Karp from WBEZ, a great education reporter. And we're going to talk about the Obama Presidential Center in just a few seconds, so hang on. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
This is Chicago Newsroom.
Welcome back. It's Chicago Newsroom, Ken Davis, and we're asking what's going on with the Obama Presidential Center. You know, the library that isn't a library, that's so special that it had to be built in Jackson Park, nestled right next to the Museum of Science and Industry. The Presidential Library that has ignited half a dozen separate little wars about benefits to the neighboring community, gentrification, displacement of longtime residents, the need for a giant high-end golf course designed by Tiger Woods, the library that requires the removal of about 700 mature trees at taxpayer expense, the relocation of a mile-long stretch of a major highway. And the stakes just got raised a little today when a major benefactor of the University of Chicago took sides with the Parks group that's fighting the Jackson Park location. So this is the perfect time to talk with Jawanza Malone, who's the executive director of the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. He's saying that real estate speculation's already happening, even though nobody knows when that first cubic foot of dirt's going to be turned, and that's just going to drive up the need for even more affordable housing. Jawanza Malone, it's a pleasure to meet you. Welcome for the first time.
Being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We got all of this to talk about, and only a short amount of time, but I know you were sitting in the control room watching as we were talking about all of these things about the graduation rate for African American youth with Sarah just now. Did you have any reaction to that?
Certainly.
Yeah, I thought you might, yeah.
So, first off, I think it just begs the question of what the priority is, right? You know, she ended her comments talking about those who need the most get the least. right? And that connects that story to this story with the community benefits agreement, right? We have a tradition in this city and frankly in this country where the people with the most need get the least.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we create these generations of not just poverty, but despair, right? We create a virtual caste system in this society where it's hard for people to break out of whatever condition they're born in, right? There was a study that came out, I guess it was a year ago, that actually took wealthy African-American families and what the life trajectory was of their children. And children of wealthy African-American families in this country tend to do poorer than their parents who are wealthy. I think
really?
that says a lot.
They come out, oh, wow, I did not see
about
that.
what's happening in this country. And it harkens back to the Black Doll experiment and the fact that there is something wrong when it comes to race relations, when it comes to expectations related to people of color, right? And I would just say the other thing is that I found it was interesting that the predominant number of children who are leaving the district are the low performing students. And for me, that gives credence to the fact that the largest population of people who are being displaced from the city are low income, working African American families.
You know, one of my favorite topics here is to rail against this student-based budgeting concept, right? Where every student, you know, everyone's the same, right? Everyone's treated equally, so everybody gets the same number of dollars. But that's not the society we live in. It's not the culture we live in. Some kids cost a few dollars more, and some kids cost many dollars more. And you've got to be able to accommodate that. And this is exactly what I think we're seeing here. It's like the kids that are most in danger, they're falling off the edge of the table, so we just put a little bucket down there for them to fall into.
Exactly.
Instead of extending the table.
And when we think about these alternative schools, and nothing against alternative schools in general, right? There are some that really try to wrap their arms around the children who walk through their doors.
I think that's why they were created in the first place.
Exactly, right? Smaller class sizes, et cetera, right? People from the community who know the conditions the young people are coming from, so they get it, right? And they can give the children what they need because they know it instinctively, intuitively, right? But the question is, what's more important? Paper or preparation, right? Yeah, some of these students may get a diploma, but are they prepared for this world?
That was my thought exactly as I was reading that story. It's like, well, okay, great, congratulations, you got a diploma. What good is it?
Yeah.
What does it mean? What does it mean that you're prepared to do in this incredible, difficult, high-tech world with fewer and fewer jobs? That diploma has to mean something.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well. Anyway, that's not why we came here together today, but everything is everything. It all ties to everything else. I'm not quite sure where to start with you on this because you're so involved in it at every level. Well, let me just ask you straight up: are you cool with the Obama Foundation building their center in the park? You think that's okay? I mean, I think that argument's kind of over at this point because it's going to happen probably. But where do you stand on just that part of it?
So, as a coalition, we haven't taken a position on that. I mean, one thing that we have said, which the community has said, is that Jackson Park is a highly utilized part of this town.
Yeah.
You can traverse Cornell Drive, Stony Island, see people out there when it's nice outside every single day of the week.
Yeah.
Every single day, utilizing those grounds.
It's a beautiful
park. In fact, the high school, which sits across the street, utilizes that park for its athletic field, right? So the idea that Jackson Park is underutilized is laughable, right? And so when we think about just the land value, not even the utilization, just the land value. I mean, that acreage of land in that part of town.
What is it, 20 acres or something?
21 acres of land.
21 acres, yeah.
is estimated to be valued at around $90 million.
Yeah.
So the foundation just gets a $90 million subsidy with nothing expected in return.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
so I understand the foundation and the city and the university all saying that the center coming to the south side is benefit enough. But if there is no real concern given to the very real risks associated with this large scale development, then is it really a benefit, or are they just planning to use this as a catalyst for displacement, as was suggested with the Olympics?
It's so complicated because, I mean, one of the arguments that the Obama Center people make is that having this library, this center, whatever it is, in the park, will benefit the neighboring community, that all of these thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who will come to see this attraction will spend a lot of time going across into Hyde Park, Kenwood, wherever. And I don't believe it. I've never believed it. I mean, I don't believe that anybody who goes to the Museum of Science and Industry leaves the car down in the basement where they parked it and trundles off 10 blocks into, to go find some little cute cafe, right? They don't do it. They get in the car and they drive back to wherever they came from. Yeah. And the Obama Center, with its parking lot, will do exactly the same thing. So it really could be built in Evanston for what it matters. It won't have, I'm guessing, it won't have any impact on the neighboring community.
Well, I think the thing that all of us tend to forget or miss in this is that the University of Chicago wrote the bid that the Obama family awarded, right? And so, yeah, we have the president doing what he did during his first term, where he's the one out front, right, making the pitch, and of course his name is on it, so that makes sense, right, to some degree. But what was the motivation behind the university taking the initiative to submit a bid in the first place? And what is it they're expecting to get out of the deal? Which is one of the reasons why early on we began to try to pick apart what was actually in the bid that they kept secret for years, right? When we look at the fact that within months of it being announced that the foundation awarded the University of Chicago the bid, right? They announced they were going to build a brand new hotel literally blocks away from the site. Then they announced they were going to build a brand new conference center blocks away from the site. So yeah, it's going to benefit the community, but whose community, right? And who's going to be left there, right? As you said in your open, people are already being displaced. And so the idea that the people who historically have called Woodlawn home or South Shore home will be able to appreciate the amenities that are coming is questionable, right? Yeah, maybe the ones who are left for as long as they're able to hold on, but the question is for how long?
So let me get this, I really want to understand this. You're saying that people are being displaced. Are people being displaced literally because the foundation is going in and buying property and moving people out? Or are people just getting freaked out and leaving already or something?
No.
Okay, all right.
What's happening is just rampant real estate speculation.
Okay.
Right, you can, if you were to drive into Woodlawn right now and just sit on any random corner while this is slowed some, you're going to see, which is what I saw, people drive in, jump out their car, take pictures of somebody else's property, get back in the car and drive off.
Right.
And these aren't mansions.
Maybe they're just tourists.
Yeah, they're tourists, well, for a very specific reason, right?
Well, they are tourists, yeah.
And so, I mean, I point to this Redfin study that was, came out often, because I think it says everything we need to understand about how real estate speculation works and how it drives displacement. Woodlawn was named for 2017 the third fastest growth in home value
Is that
for
right?
every neighborhood. So looking at neighborhoods, So you take every neighborhood in every city, in every state in this country, Woodlawn was number 3.
Yikes.
The only thing that changed was the announcement the Presidential Center was going in Jackson Park. And so the simple announcement
Wow.
has driven real estate speculation in a way that we have not seen in Chicago.
And you know, the other thing too about, you know, you walk around Woodlawn, you see, even apart from the Obama Library, there are these neighborhoods, Pilsen is one, for example, that are they're just sitting there waiting for the speculation to come in, because the buildings that are there have been through some rough times, but they're still looking really good.
Exactly.
And you could make a really nice graystone single home, single family home out of that and sell it for 1.2.
Well, I wouldn't want to think that they're waiting for this. In fact, 10,000 families have been Latino families who called Pilsen home for generations. Ended up being displaced.
Absolutely
Same
right.
things happened
Right.
in Logan Square, Humboldt Park,
Along
where
the 606.
15,000, 20,000 families having to move oftentimes further west.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm just saying that a piece of that puzzle is when you have the additional factor of having some really nice buildings.
Yeah, good housing stock.
Yeah, good stock. And that's going to be taken away from the people who are living in it. And, I mean, I don't need to tell you this, one of the biggest, most fraught discussions we've been having in this city for the last 20 years is about affordable housing and how to develop affordable housing. And we seem to be almost maliciously, malignantly negligent in that regard. We just seem like we just don't want to build it.
We don't. I was in D.C. yesterday, talking with a group of people about affordable housing, people who are coming together from different states who are having the same problem. At the same time, in Springfield, our state capital, in a committee, there was a debate on whether the ban on rent control should be lifted here in Illinois to allow that discussion to move forward in municipalities across the state. Democrats, right? Now, you may say Republicans, they're against whatever regulations and they want the free market to rule. Democrats, right? People who are experiencing displacement in their communities, real estate speculation in their communities, people being displaced, right? Illinois is the only state in the country that's lost population 4 years in a row. The only state. And again, the majority of those people, low income or working families, right? So our legislators had the opportunity to enact a tool that could be used to stabilize communities, and they voted against it. And the real estate industry, their lobbyists were there arguing against the merits of rent control with arguments that for 50 years they've been making that hold no water, right? And so they're making arguments that have not come true. They're sitting around a campfire at night telling these scary stories about what rent control does, which never happens, right? But because our legislators are beholden to these right-wing interests, they're going to go against the needs and the wishes of their constituents to, again, deny us access to real affordable housing in this state.
Well, that kind of brings us to the front door of this whole discussion about a community benefits agreement, right? I mean, it's a contract, as far as I can tell. It's like it's the community saying, okay, you're going to do this.
Right.
Here's what you want, here's what we want, and we'll sit down at the bargaining table just like the CTU does, and we will hammer out an agreement, and you will live with it. And I mentioned earlier that I've always found so absurd this notion that just gets put out there all the time, that if you cut a deal with cocoa, then God knows how many other people are going to come to us wanting, everybody's going to want their little piece. Well, why can't there be a kind of an umbrella agreement made and a sort of a time certain at which this agreement goes into effect? And then all those mythical other little groups out there where they're locked out because they weren't in time. I mean, it just seems to me that this is not an impossible thing to do. Or even
So-
difficult.
It's a ridiculous argument. It just is, right? The same way that you can't understand why that argument has legs is the same reason why the entire country does not understand why that argument is being used, right? In the same way that we were able to get a community benefits agreement tied to Chicago's bid for the 2016 Olympic
Yeah.
Summer Games
Yeah.
as an ordinance that got passed through City Council
Yeah.
by our elected representatives is the exact same thing we're asking for here. And the effort to say, well, this is COCO or STOP or any of the coalition groups trying to cut a side deal for themselves is ridiculous. It is disingenuous, and it's a poor talking point that I believe they felt would have some leverage.
Yeah.
And it hasn't worked, and it won't work because one, people recognize who we are and the fact that we have integrity and nothing we've done is for us, is always for the community. And there's precedent, right? How many contracts, how many laws have been enacted by City Council that we have no say over,
Yeah.
right? The parking meters, the Skyway, Midway, right?
Oh, don't start bringing that stuff up.
But it
it's
happens,
just minor,
right?
minor stuff. Yeah.
It's how
Yeah, yeah.
things operate.
Yeah.
And so for the foundation, the university, and the city to say they don't understand how this could happen.
Oh, I
is
just got the
ridiculous.
answer. You need to find yourself a multinational conglomerate that would like to have a community benefits agreement, and they'll come in and they'll hammer it out for you in an afternoon.
That's
a
it.
couple of calls, a call to the mayor's cell phone, and it's done. Right?
You just figured it out for us,
that's
Ken.
the way
Thank
it
you.
works. And free.
We should have brought you into the
no
coalition
charge.
years ago.
Absolutely no charge. Is it possible in this weird environment of a kind of a little TV show without, we can't really get into gross details, but what would a good community benefits agreement look like? Give me the outline of it.
So it's a couple things. Number one, it involves the community, right? So you cannot have, or you shouldn't have, a community benefits agreement that's negotiated behind closed doors somewhere, right? The idea is, how do you bring the community in this process to be face to face with whoever the developer is to work things out?
Yeah.
Second thing is that the referendum that just won by 88%, right, spells it out.
Yeah.
We need set asides for affordable housing, right? We need community control over the vacant land in the community, right? We need oversight over all things that are happening in the name of the community, right? We need a community fund established in perpetuity to make sure that things do not fall off the rails here. Because again, in Chicago, there's a track record of things starting in one place and ending up someplace completely different.
Yeah.
And so the community needs to be involved every step of the way here.
Did I read recently that your alderman has switched sides and is now in favor of a CBA? Is that true?
Thank God for elections, right? So
That's why we
Fifth
have
Ward
elections
Alderman, Leslie Harrison, has said that now she supports a community benefit agreement because Tuesday she has to come before the voters again.
Because
right?
she got run off against.
Exactly. And her challenger from the very beginning has said he supports a community benefit agreement, as does the residents in her ward via the referendum, right? And
So maybe there was some polling done, huh?
well, here's the thing. We had representatives at her ward night meeting this past Tuesday, where she refused to sign off on what was on the ballot. So the thing that 80% of her constituents voted for, the affordable housing, the jobs, et cetera, she was unwilling to sign. So for us, it sounds as if she's giving lip service to something she has no real intention of holding true on post-election if she wins again.
There's a new development literally as we were sitting down today, that the Reva and David Logan Foundation, this just came out of nowhere as far as I can tell. They just suddenly dropped $100,000 on the organization that is leading the legal fight to keep it out of the parks. Protect our parks, right? And they even said something about it being an initial grant. So They have, let's just put it this way, the Logan Foundation has made its statement about what it thinks about where it should be. And, you know, they just built the big Logan
Center of the Arts.
Yeah, that's a beautiful building. Does that mean anything politically?
I think it does, right? When we think about the fact that both mayoral candidates have said they support a community benefits agreement. You have candidates not just in the 5th Ward, but the 20th Ward as well, saying they support a community benefits agreement. You have the judge, Judge Blakely, in the case, reprimanding the city's attorney for being less than honest during the court proceedings. I think all this is measuring up to the fact that the University of Chicago, the City of Chicago, and the Obama Foundation needs to think seriously about how they begin to negotiate a community benefits agreement to give the community what it is that they're asking for.
To be clear about this, one of the debate points that's been made from the beginning on this was that if the Obama Foundation really wanted to help Hyde Park, Kenwood, Oakland, you know, any of these surrounding areas, South Shore, it would put it in that community so that the whatever you want to call it, the knock-on benefits from it would be right there in the neighborhood. And yes, maybe there could be some gentrification. Maybe there could be some very cool little coffee shops and things all building up around there. And the neighborhood would benefit from it in a way that it can't benefit from it in the park. Have you ever bought that argument?
So here's the thing, right? As you point out, wherever the presidential center gets built, there's going to be risk involved, right? Some of the projections have estimated 800,000 people on an annual basis are going to come visit the presidential center. What does that mean for traffic congestion?
Yeah.
Right, not just vehicular, but pedestrian.
Yeah.
Right, so if we put this in any residential community, because even placing it in the park, across the street, literally across the street from the park, you have homes, right? So we're talking about residential property where this center is going to go, right, regardless of the location. How does that impact those people who live there? If you now have 800,000 more people on your streets, in front of your home, figuring out some place to park, figuring out some place to shop.
So you figure out a way to get a free parking space if you can, right?
Yeah.
Like we all do. Yeah. You know, before we started the show today, you and Sarah and I were standing out in the hall, and I had my mind opened in a way that I had not ever before. I thought I pretty much knew all the thoughts that I had on this thing. And I've always been strongly in this camp of, you know, look, there's plenty of open space all around the area. God knows they could find a little spot where they could put this museum, and it would benefit the community directly, and putting it in the park doesn't benefit the community in any way that I can tell. And then the question was raised, well, how would you like it if why don't we build the Obama Center 2.5 blocks away from your house? How would you feel about that? And I have to say that honestly, I guess I just hadn't ever considered it in that way. So it's not all that popular an idea to build it out in the community.
So here's the thing, right? The same question is happening around Lincoln Yards, the 78. The idea that we can plop a major development down anywhere we want and nobody has an opportunity to say anything about it is something that we really got to think seriously about, right? Again, the question is what and who is the priority? And so we feel largely the prioritization of putting in Jackson Park was to benefit the University of Chicago, just to be frank about it. And I think the University of Chicago saw it that way. In fact, in their bid document that finally was made public, at the bottom of page 131, I think, it says part of the attraction or benefit to placing a center in Jackson Park is the ability to bring new residents to that part of town. Now, I should add that it also talks about minimal risk of displacement, but anybody who's lived in Chicago more than a month knows that you cannot just plop a bunch of new people into a community
Yeah.
and expect it not to displace somebody.
Ask all the folks who've left Pilsen in the last 2 years about that.
Pilsen, Little Village,
right.
I mean, Inglewood, right?
Yep.
Take your pick. And so for us, it really is about figuring out who should benefit from this development, and should the University of Chicago be the only entity that benefits? And we think
But,
not.
I mean, come clean on this. The real thing for you, though, is that you want to be able to go play golf in a high-end golf course, right?
I talked to Tiger Woods right before I came on, and he said, hey, make a pitch for my golf course for me.
So you're endorsing the golf course right now. Yeah, I can see.
Here's the funny thing. People debate on the Presidential Center. The golf course is virtually a non-starter. I mean,
Yeah,
people
yeah.
who will argue tooth and nail with me about a community benefits agreement for the Presidential Center, in the next breath say, yeah, I get the golf course. Like, yeah, we don't need that.
We don't need
but this Presidential Center,
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that's so weird about it is that there have been so many stories in the last year or so about country clubs and golf courses facing their own doom because it's all people my age, and you know, nobody under 60 is using these things, and you know, more and more they have to have people literally carry them around to the, you know, I'm exaggerating,
but that's the
it is
funny
a generational
thing, right?
thing.
So part of the argument that I've heard groups make as to why there should be a PGA course in Jackson Park is literally just that. It'll create jobs. They'll need caddies.
And
so
people to carry the old man around.
Kids in the neighborhood will be able to get jobs as caddies. That's why we need to
Yeah.
renovate the golf course there.
So for that, we give up about a quarter of Jackson Park, and we
Exactly.
spend millions and millions of dollars, and maybe those millions and millions of dollars could build a small manufacturing plant somewhere where those kids could work
That's the
and
thing.
make
What's
a
the
good
priority?
living and raise a family with it. But that's that's all right. We've only got a couple of seconds left. We literally have a minute or two left. I want to quote you from a recent statement you made. People still aren't any closer to figuring out who the next mayor should be, said Jawanza Malone, director of the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. It is great that they're trying to out-progressive each other now, but Tony Preckwinkle has a checkered past with this community, and so does Lori Lightfoot. Expand on that. I hear Tony Preckwinkle all the time talking about how she brought 1,500 units of affordable housing to the Fifth Ward.
And displaced 2,500 families. And so we have this same situation, right? You look at Lightfoot's record, where hearing after hearing, she shut down the voices of families who were traumatized at the hands of Chicago's police department. How do you reconcile that?
I'm really sorry to have to cut you short just because of time here, but you're not endorsing either one of them, I take it at this
No, I'm
point.
not.
Okay, all right. Jawanza, it was great meeting you. We've never met before, and I'm so happy to have had you on the show.
No, this was an honor and a pleasure. Thank you, Ken, for the invitation.
Thanks very much. And that's Jawanza Malone. As we said, he's the executive director of COCO, the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. And you have been watching Chicago Newsroom. We're back again next week with our grand after the election look at what happened and what it's going to mean. So hope you'll join us then. Don't forget, this is where you can go anytime to see all of our past shows. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks to David Resnick for producing, and to Wendy Posner for her assistance in the production of this show. See you next week. Bye.